I'm not going to ask you why, the man below said. He stood in the long grass with the foot of an aluminum ladder braced in both hands, the metal catching the hard gold of a July afternoon, and he set it against the chapel wall, the careful way you set down something you mean to hold steady for a long while. Above him rose 30 feet of warm honey-colored stone and one open window. In the window, a bride. Nora had one satin shoe off and one bare foot hooked over the sill, and the veil kept lifting on the warm wind as though it wanted to leave without her. She looked down at the stranger. He looked up. He did not ask her what she thought she was doing, or who she was running from, or whether she had lost her mind on the most expensive afternoon of her life. "Take your time," he said. "I've got it. The rungs are dry." Her heart was going so hard she could feel it in her teeth. "You don't even know me. Don't need to." He shifted his grip. "You know the way down. That's the only expert I need." What neither of them knew, in that gold and that heat, with the cicadas sawing in the elms and the organ inside, beginning its slow warm-up 2 rooms away, was that the ladder he was steadying would cost him the one place he had finally let himself belong. A few hours earlier there had been no window and no ladder, only a June that had spilled into July too hot, and a wedding the whole town of Marbury had been polishing for a year. The morning had smelled of hairspray and cut peonies, and the faint scorched sweetness of a curling iron left too long on the vanity. Nora sat in the bridal room on the chapel's upper floor while 3 women moved around her like she was furniture that needed dressing. Sunlight came through the old glass in slow amber bars and lay across the wide plank floor. And outside the propped window she could hear the caterers dragging folding chairs across the flagstones, a metallic shriek again and again that nobody but her seemed to notice. "Chin up, love, or the liner smudges," said her mother Diane, tilting Nora's face with 2 cool fingers. "There, look at you." Nora looked. The mirror gave her back a woman in ivory silk, with her collarbones showing and her hair pinned so tight it pulled at the corners of her eyes. She looked expensive. She looked finished, the way a room looks finished when the last cushion is placed and nobody is allowed to sit down. "You've gone pale," Diane said. "Eat something." "I can't." "The dress." "Then don't eat and don't faint. Pick one." From the corner came a dry snort. That was Aunt Marion, 71, in a hat the size of a bird bath, working a threaded needle along a seam that had popped that morning. "In my day," Marion said, not looking up, "we married the man, not the guest list. Hold still, Nora, before I sew your sleeve to the chair and solve everyone's problem." "Marion," Diane warned. "I'm only saying the flowers cost more than my first house." Marion bit the thread. "If the marriage lasts as long as the peonies, we'll have got our money's worth." Nora laughed, and the laugh came out too high and stopped too fast, and she pressed her thumbnail hard into the center of her palm where nobody could see it. That was the trick. A small pain you chose was easier than a large feeling you hadn't. Down the hall a door opened and shut, and a voice she knew rolled toward them, smooth, unhurried, the voice of a man who had never once in his life had to repeat himself to be heard. Grant, ladies, he filled the doorway in a charcoal suit that fit him the way money fits people who grow up with it. He did not step in, grooms were not supposed to see the dress, and Grant Whitfield never broke a rule he could be admired for keeping. "Diane, Marion, my bride behaving? She's perfect," Diane said. "She always is." Grant's eyes found Nora in the mirror and stayed there a beat too long, appraising, the way he looked at a table in a restaurant before deciding whether it was good enough to be seated at. "Little thing, the Hallorans arrived. Your father's seating them front left. Try to look thrilled. They moved a board meeting for this." "I'm thrilled," Nora said. "You look like you're at the dentist." He smiled to take the edge off, and the edge stayed anyway. 2 o'clock. Don't be dramatic about the aisle, just walk it." And he was gone, and the hallway carried the sound of him greeting someone else. Warm and golden, a man everyone was glad to see. The room let out a breath it had been holding. "He's under pressure," Diane said, to the mirror, to herself. "It's a big day. It's her day," Marion said. "It's everyone's day, Marion." And there it was, laid out plain as the veil across the bed, whose day it was. Nora looked at the woman in the glass and could not find, anywhere in that finished, expensive face, the girl who had once wanted things. Loud, specific things, a life that smelled like sawdust and sea air instead of hairspray. She had traded that girl for peace so gradually she had never felt the transaction happen. You gave a little to keep a room calm, then a little more. Then one morning you were silk to the collarbone, and you could not remember agreeing to any of it. "I need air," Nora said, and stood before anyone could pin her back down. The chapel's back stair was cool stone and smelled of old candle wax and damp lime, and she took it 2 flights down and out a side door into the garden, where the heat hit her like a held breath. July and Marbury did not do anything by halves. The lawn ran gold-green down to a low stone wall the elms threw shade in coins. And somewhere close the cicadas kept up their electric hum. White folding chairs stood in obedient rows. An arbor waited at the front, wound with roses already going soft in the sun, dropping petals like they'd decided early. And there, at the far corner of the chapel, where the old bell tower louvers met the wall, was a man on a ladder with his sleeves shoved to the elbow, doing something patient with a chisel and a length of oak. She hadn't expected anyone real. She'd expected staff, people who looked at her and saw the wedding. This man wasn't looking at her at all. He was looking at the wood, turning a new cut piece against the old frame, testing the fit, easing it back out to shave a hair off the edge. Sawdust drifted down through a bar of light and caught in the grass. The smell of it reached her from 20 feet, clean, resinous, green, and something in her chest unlocked a quarter turn at just the smell. "It won't go," she said, before she'd decided to speak. He glanced down, not startled, a steady, unhurried face, sun-browned, a few days unshaven. Dark hair pushed back with the wrist because the hands were full. Older than her by some years, with the kind of eyes that had learned to wait. What won't? The piece. You keep taking it out. Because it keeps not going. He said it like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. Old frames swelled with the heat, new woods proud by a whisker. I can force it and split the frame today, or shave it and have it fit for the next 100 years. He turned the oak in his fingers. I'm not in a hurry to break something that's held this long. Everyone else is in a hurry, I noticed. He nodded at the rows of chairs, the arbor, the whole white apparatus of the day. Big afternoon. It's mine, she said, and heard how strange it came out, flat, like reading a fact off a form. I mean, it's my wedding. Something moved behind his eyes, there and gone, too well-mannered to be pity. Congratulations, he said, and turned back to the frame, and did not add a single thing. No, who's the lucky man? No, you must be so excited. No, you look beautiful. He simply gave her the enormous, unfamiliar gift of not requiring anything back. She should have gone in. Instead, she stood in the heat and watched him work, and the sawdust smell wrapped around her, and she found she could breathe to the bottom of her lungs for the first time since the church bells started. I'm Nora, she said. Theo. He fit the oak against the frame again, and this time it slid home with a soft wooden knock. Snug, true, seamless. He pressed it with his thumb, satisfied, and only then looked back down at her. There, 100 years. She almost smiled. How do you know it'll last that long? I don't. He wiped the chisel on his thigh. But I gave it every chance instead of forcing it to be done by 2:00. That's most of it, usually, giving the thing a fair shot before you decide it fits. Behind her, from the open upstairs window, her mother's voice floated down thin and bright. Nora? Nora, the photographer's here. Come up. Theo's eyes went to the window, then back to her, and he said nothing about the summons, nothing about the note in her mother's voice, nothing at all. But he held her look 1 second longer than a stranger needed to, and in it was a question he was far too courteous to ask out loud. Are you all right? Coming, Nora called up, bright as her mother, and hated how easily the brightness came. She went back up the cool stone stair, and the higher she climbed the tighter the silk felt, and by the time she reached the bridal room, the small, unlocked feeling from the garden had sealed over again like water closing above a dropped stone. The next hour happened to her rather than with her. The photographer posed her hands. Diane fixed a curl that didn't need fixing. Someone brought a glass of iced tea, sweating in the heat, and Nora held it without drinking because of the dress. Through the wall she could hear the guests arriving, the low churn of 100 voices, the organ testing a chord and letting it fade. Grant's laugh, once carrying above the rest. 20 minutes, a coordinator said, ducking her head in. We're nearly there. Marion had gone down to be seated. It was just Nora and her mother, and the shriek of the last chairs being set outside the window. Diane fussed the veil, then stepped back, and for one unguarded moment her face was not organizing anything. It was just tired, and proud, and afraid. You know how lucky you are, Diane said quietly. It wasn't a question. A man like Grant, a life like this. I never had. I want you safe, Nora, settled. I want you to never lie awake doing sums the way I did. Her hand smoothed the silk at Nora's shoulder. This is safe. He's steady. He'll never leave you wanting. I know, Mom. Then why do you look like that? Nora opened her mouth to say the brightness, the reassurance, the thing that would settle the room. And on the sill behind her mother, propped where the coordinator had left it, was the little printed program, cream card, gold letters, Grant's name first and larger, hers beneath it in a smaller font, the way you'd print an event and its venue. The venue in a smaller font. She looked at it, and the small chosen pane in her palm wasn't enough anymore. I need a minute alone, Nora said. Please, just before, 1 minute. Diane hesitated. Then, because the day had a schedule and the schedule was a kind of mercy, she nodded and pressed a kiss to Nora's hair, careful not to smudge anything, and slipped out, and the latch clicked, and Nora was alone in the amber light with 100 voices humming beyond the wall, and a life laid out for her like a place setting. She went to the window for air. The garden lay below, gold and green, the chairs filling, the arbor dropping its soft petals. And there, still at the far corner, packing his tools into a canvas roll with the unhurried care of a man who answered to nobody's 2:00, was Theo. He'd carried his ladder down and leaned it against the wall below her window while he coiled a cord. She thought about the oak sliding home. 100 years. Give the thing a fair shot before you decide it fits. She thought about the smaller font. She thought about lying awake, doing a different kind of sums, not of money, but of all the loud, specific things she'd traded away one calm room at a time, and how many more rooms there were still to keep calm, for the rest of a safe and settled life in which she would never once be asked what she wanted. Her hand was on the window latch before her mind caught up with it. The old sash went up easier than it should have. Theo's work, maybe. The frames eased and true. And the warm afternoon poured in, Sawdust and roses and cut grass and the cicadas louder now. And the drop was 30 feet of honeystone down to a ladder that just happened to be leaning exactly where a person would need it. She got one satin shoe off. Then the other. She hooked a bare foot over the warm sill, gripped the frame until her knuckles went white, and looked down. Theo had gone still. He stood with the coil of cord in one hand and his face turned up to her, reading the whole thing in a heartbeat, the bare feet, the white knuckles, the wedding 2 rooms away tuning its organ. She waited for it. The shout. The don't. The you can't. The think about what you're doing. The running for someone with more authority than a carpenter to talk sense into the bride. Instead, he set the cord down in the grass. He took the ladder in both hands. He planted its feet, tested it with a shove of his shoulder, and looked up at her, and said the thing she would remember for the rest of her life. I'm not going to ask you why. The wind lifted the veil. Below, the organ swelled into something that sounded like a beginning. Nora looked down at the stranger holding the ladder steady, asking nothing, and for the first time all day she could not feel her own pulse in her teeth. You don't even know me, she said again, because it was the only true thing left. Don't need to. His voice stayed level, warm, unhurried, a hand under her without touching her. Come down when you're ready, not before. I've got it as long as you need. Somewhere behind her, the latch rattled. Her mother's voice, muffled through the door, changed key. Nora? The door's Nora. Open the door. It's time. Nora? Nora looked at the door. She looked at the drop. She looked at the man in the grass who had given her in one afternoon the 2 rarest things she'd ever been offered, a fair shot and no questions. She put her weight onto the top rung. The metal was warm and dry, exactly as he'd promised, and it held. The second rung took her weight, then the third, and the world narrowed to the warm bite of aluminum under her bare arches and the wall's honeystone sliding up past her face. She did not look down again. She listened to the voice below her instead, which had begun to talk, low even. About nothing. That's it. Left foot now. There's a rung right where you think there is. Theo's words came up steady as a banister. Don't grip so hard. Let your feet do the knowing. I can't feel my hands, Nora said. Then your feet'll have to be clever for both. Almost there. The veil snagged on the frame above and tore free with a small ripping sigh. And a scrap of tulle drifted down past her and settled in the grass like a dropped napkin. She was close enough now to smell him, sawdust and sun-warm cotton, and something clean underneath, cedar, maybe. And then his hand was there, not grabbing, just open beside her elbow. An offered thing she could take or not. She took it. His grip closed warm and dry and absolutely certain, and her bare feet found the grass, and she was down. For 1 second, neither of them let go. There, Theo said, and released her hand as if it were something borrowed. 100 years. A laugh tore out of her, high and wet and astonished, and she pressed the back of her wrist to her mouth to stop it turning into the other thing. Above them the open window gaped. Beyond the wall, muffled, the organ rolled toward its cue, and 100 people in white folding chairs waited for a bride who was standing barefoot in the elm shade with sawdust on the hem of $4,000 of silk. They're going to come looking, she said. Probably he was already moving, unhurried, folding the ladder down with 2 practice snaps. You want to be gone before they do, or you want to be standing here explaining? Gone, the word came out before she chose it, and it felt like the first true thing she'd said all week. Gone. God. Gone where? I don't have shoes, I don't have keys, my whole. Her voice climbed. My whole life is in that building. Not your whole life. Theo hoisted the ladder onto his shoulder, nodded down the slope toward the low stone wall and the gravel lane behind it where an old green pickup sat nose out under a chestnut. That's my truck. There's a blanket on the seat and half a thermos of coffee that's gone cold. It's not much. But it goes. She stared at him. Why are you helping me? I'm not helping you do anything. He said it plainly, no performance in it. I held a ladder. You climbed down it. Everything after this is yours. Then, gentler, watching her face, but I'm not going to leave you barefoot on a wall either. Come on. You can decide the rest from the passenger seat as easy as from here. Behind them, 3 stories up, the latch gave. A man's shoulder hit the bridal room door, and the old wood banged wide, and Diane's voice spilled out the window into the golden air, no longer bright, no longer organizing anything. The window's open. The window's open. Nora, that's our cue, Theo said, and did not run, and somehow his not running was the thing that let Nora move at all. They went down the slope through the long grass, the ground still holding the day's heat under her feet, grasshoppers flinging themselves out of her path, and the cicadas roaring like the whole afternoon had turned up its own volume. She climbed the stone wall. He steadied the ladder, then her, then swung both over after. The truck door groaned when she opened it, and the cab smelled of pencil shavings and old coffee and warm vinyl, and there was, exactly as promised, a folded wool blanket the color of oatmeal. She pulled it into her lap like a shield. Theo slung the ladder into the bed, got in, and turned the key. The engine caught rough and then smoothed. He did not peel away. He pulled out onto the lane at the speed of a man with nowhere he had to be, gravel ticking under the tires, and in the side mirror Nora watched the chapel shrink, honeystone, white chairs, one black-suited figure now out on the front steps with a phone to his ear, turning, scanning, growing small. "That's him," she said. "That's Grant." Theo's eyes flicked to the mirror once, then back to the road. Big afternoon for him, too. Then she laughed again, and this time it didn't frighten her. They drove the long way out of Marbury, past the shut-up ice cream stand and the ball field, where somebody's evening game was just switching on its lights, and Nora watched the town she'd lived in her whole life roll by the window as if she'd never once seen it before. Her heart was slowing. Her hands had come back. And underneath the enormous roaring relief was a small cold pebble of a thought that she turned over and over. She had no idea what she had just done, and she had done it in front of everyone, and there would be no oak frame way to shave this one smooth and slide it back like it fit. "I don't even know you," she said for the 3rd time that day, but softer now. Almost to herself. "You keep saying that." Theo shifted down for the bend by the river. "It true still?" She looked at his hands on the wheel, nicked and sure. Less than it was this morning. They stopped at a bait and tackle store on the county road because it was open and it sold. Among the lures and the ice, a rack of rubber flip flops in a bin by the door. Theo bought her a pair, blue, 2 sizes too big, and a bottle of water and a paper sack of salted peanuts, and he laid 3 worn bills on the counter and asked for nothing back. The man behind the register looked at Nora, bare-shouldered, sawdust on her hem, a torn veil pin still glinting in her hair, and looked at Theo and had the good country manners to say only, "Warm one out there tonight." "Going to be," Theo agreed, and held the door. In the gravel lot she put the flip-flops on and stood in them, and started, without any warning to herself, to cry, not prettily, not the single-tear way the photographer would have posed, but the real thing, ugly and shaking, her hands over her face. Theo did not touch her. He did not tell her it was all right. He leaned against the warm flank of the truck a courteous arm's length away and let her have it, the way he'd let the oak sit proud until it was ready, and when the worst of it had passed, he held out the water bottle without a word. "Thank you," she managed. "For the water?" "For not asking." Something crossed his face then, quick and complicated, and he looked off toward the river where the light was going long and coppery on the current. "People ask because they want to fix it," he said, "or because they want to be the one who was told. Both of those are about them." He handed her the peanuts, too. "You didn't need an audience. You had one of those already." She wiped her face with the back of her wrist, smearing what was left of the careful liner. "You sound like a man who's climbed out a window or two." He didn't answer that. He looked at the river a moment longer, and the not answering was its own kind of answer, and Nora filed it away, the first small locked door in a man who'd spent the whole afternoon opening hers. By the time the light failed, they were back inside Marbury's limits because Nora had nowhere else on Earth to go, and the plain arithmetic of it had finally caught up with the runaway feeling. Her phone was in the bridal room. Her car keys were in her mother's handbag. Her apartment lease had ended 3 weeks ago in cheerful anticipation of a shared house with a man she had just left standing on the chapel steps. She had escaped into a life that had no next room prepared. "I can drop you at your mother's," Theo offered, slowing at the edge of the square. "No, fast, flat, not tonight." Nora pressed her thumbnail into her palm, and this time noticed she was doing it, and made herself stop. "She'll cry and forgive me, and by morning she'll have it arranged so it never happened. I can't, not tonight. I need one night where nobody arranges me." Theo drummed his fingers once on the wheel. Then he pulled the truck around the back of the square, down an alley she'd never had reason to notice, and stopped in front of a narrow brick storefront with a hand-painted sign gone soft with age, hail and sun, joinery, restoration, honest work. Warm light showed in the upstairs windows. "It's not much," he said for the second time that day. "Workshop down, 2 rooms up. There's a couch that's more honest than comfortable, and a lock on the door, and nobody in this town would think to look for a runaway bride above a carpenter's shop." He cut the engine. "You'd have your one night. I'll sleep in the shop. I've done it before. Plenty." Nora looked at the sign. "Hail and sun. Which are you, hail or sun?" For the first time all day, something in him closed a fraction. "Both, now," he said, and got out to open her door. The workshop breathed sawdust and linseed oil and the deep, sweet smell of 100 cutboards, and in the dark it was all soft shapes. A lathe, a wall of chisels racked by size, half a table on sawhorses with its grain glowing faintly under a work lamp someone had left burning. Theo touched the tabletop as he passed the way another man might touch a sleeping dog, absent, fond. Upstairs the 2 rooms were spare and clean and full of books, and there was, as promised, a couch and a kettle and a window box where somebody had, improbably, kept basil alive through the July heat. He made her tea she didn't ask for, set out a clean flannel shirt for her to change into, and then, with the courtesy that was starting to undo her more thoroughly than any kindness she had a name for, he said good night and went down to sleep among the wood. Nora sat on the honest couch in a stranger's flannel shirt with a mug going cold in her hands and listened to the small sounds of the building settling and thought, "I have done something that cannot be shaved smooth." And under it, quieter, a thing she was almost afraid to look at directly, that for the first time in a year she had spent an entire evening without once performing being fine. She slept. To her astonishment, she slept. The banging on the workshop door came at 7:10, and it was not the tentative knock of a customer. Nora woke to it disoriented, the July sun already hard and white in the window box basil, and by the time she'd found the flip-flops and gotten to the top of the stairs, the door was already open below, and the morning was pouring in, and with it a voice she knew in her spine. "Don't care whose shop it is, I want to see her." Grant charcoal suit again, or a fresh one exactly like it, immaculate at 7 in the morning in a way that meant he hadn't slept and had ironed his composure on instead. He stood in the workshop doorway with the square's early light behind him and 2 other men just off his shoulder, Nora's father, gray-faced and silent. And a 3rd man in a golf shirt she half recognized from the front left pews. "Nora, there you are." Grant's eyes came up the stairs and fixed on her, and his whole face rearranged itself into hurt, warm, forgiving hurt, faster than any face should be able to. "God, Nora, thank God." "Do you have any idea? How did you find me?" Nora said. Small town. He said it like an endearment. A man buys a runaway bride a pair of flip-flops at Dell's on the county road. Dell tells his wife. His wife tells the whole 8 o'clock service. His gaze slid past her to Theo, who had come to stand at the foot of the stairs in yesterday's shirt, with a coffee in his hand and a stillness that had gone very deep. And this must be the Good Samaritan. "Theo Hale," Theo said, and did not offer the hand that wasn't holding coffee. Grant Whitfield. Grant let the name sit in the sawdust like he expected it to do work, and Nora watched him clock the shop, the worn floor, the racked tools, the half a table, the hand-painted sign, and watched him price all of it in one downward sweep and arrive at a number he found reassuring. Whitfield, as in the Whitfield Group. As in, and here he smiled, and the smile had teeth in it now, the firm that holds the paper on about half this square, including, if I'm not mistaken, this building. The coffee mug in Theo's hand went very still. "Grant," Nora's father said quietly. "Don't. I'm not doing anything, Ray. I'm making conversation with the man who housed my—" Grant's jaw worked once, with Nora's host. "It's a nice shop, Mr. Hale Old Bones. Wants money it doesn't have, by the look of the frames." "You lease or own? That's my business," Theo said. "It's about to be everyone's business." Grant turned back to Nora, and the teeth went away, and the hurt came back, seamless, and he came a few steps up toward her with both hands open. "Sweetheart, whatever this is, cold feet, nerves, whatever you needed to prove, it's done. All right? You proved it. I'm not angry. I stood on those steps in front of 400 people, and I told every one of them there'd been a family emergency, and the wedding was postponed. Not canceled, postponed. Because I know you. And I know this isn't you." He was close now, close enough that she could smell his cologne over the sawdust, and it turned her stomach in a way it never had before, because now she had another smell to compare it to. "Come home. We'll fix the date. Nobody has to know anything except what I already told them." And there it was, the oak sliding back into the frame. The whole afternoon shaved smooth and slid home like it fit. Nobody has to know. Everyone at 8 o'clock service already knew, and he would rewrite it by supper, and in a year it would be the funny story of the day she got nervous, and she would be silk to the collarbone forever. "No," Nora said. The word landed in the shop like a dropped tool. Grant blinked. It was, she realized, an expression she had almost never seen on him, genuine, unguarded surprise. The face of a man who had made a career of never once having to repeat himself to be heard. "No what?" "No, I'm not coming home. No, we're not fixing the date." Her voice was shaking, but it did not stop. "You told 400 people there was an emergency." "There wasn't an emergency, Grant. There was me at the top of a ladder feeling better about a 30-foot drop than about walking down your aisle. That's not nerves. That's an answer. Her father made a low sound. The man in the golf shirt looked at his shoes. And Grant stood very still on the workshop stairs, and Nora watched the warmth drain out of his face like water out of a cracked basin. And what was left underneath was the thing she'd caught glimpses of for a year and always talked herself out of. Not rage. Colder than rage. Calculation, I see, he said softly. He came the rest of the way up, close, and dropped his voice so only she could hear it, warm as a hand on the back of the neck. You want to do this the hard way. In front of your father. Above the shop of a man who's about to have a very difficult autumn. He straightened, and the public voice came back on like a light. Ray, take your daughter home when she's ready. There's no hurry. I'm a patient man. He turned on the stair, unhurried now, a man who had decided something and found the decision comfortable. At the bottom he stopped beside Theo, and the two of them stood a moment in the doorway light, of a height, one in charcoal and one in sawdust. Hale and Son, Grant read off nothing, off memory, off the sign he'd clocked coming in. Your father built this, didn't he? 30 years. And you've been, 4 years back trying to keep it breathing, after he, a small, courteous pause exquisitely placed. After he stepped back. Sole proprietor now. Which means when the note comes due in September, and it does come due in September, Mr. Hale, there's no one but you standing between this shop and my firm's balance sheet. He set his own untouched sympathy down like a card on a table. Steady hands, though. I saw the ladder in your truck bed. You're good at holding things up. He smiled. For a while. And he walked out into the white July morning, and the golf shirt man followed. And after a long, terrible moment, so did Nora's father. Though at the door Ray turned and looked up the stairs at his daughter with something in his face she couldn't read, fear, or maybe, buried so deep she might have imagined it, the faintest unwilling flicker of relief, before he too was gone, and the shop door swung shut on its slow hinge and clicked, and the sawdust motes turned gold in the sudden quiet. Nora came down the stairs on legs that didn't feel like hers. Theo hadn't moved. He was looking at the closed door with the stillness of a man reading weather. He owns your building, she said. His firm holds the mortgage my father took against it. Theo set the cold coffee down on the half table, precise, controlled, 4 years ago. To cover the bad season, and he stopped, chose the veiled word, the way she'd watched him choose the oak. To cover the year my father got sick and couldn't work. I've been paying it down since. On time. Every month. He flexed his right hand, the nicked one, as if it had gone stiff. There's a balloon payment in September. I've been saving toward it for 2 years. I was going to make it. It would have been close, but I was going to make it. Was, Nora said. Past tense. He can make a September problem into a July problem if he wants to. Theo's jaw tightened. Call the note early on a technicality. Refuse a renewal. There's 100 legal ways for a man with a firm and a grudge to close a shop that's one payment from safe. He looked at her then, and there was no blame in it. None, which was somehow worse. You asked me yesterday why I was helping. I told you I just held a ladder. Theo, I'd hold it again. He said it fast, before she could turn it into an apology, before she could pick up the guilt he could see her reaching for. Whatever this costs. I want you to hear me say that once, out loud, so you don't spend the next month thinking you have to fix it by going back to him. You climbing down that ladder wasn't the mistake. Don't you dare let him make it into one. He picked the coffee back up, drank the cold inch of it, grimaced, but I won't lie to you about what it costs either. You wanted no questions and no arrangements. That I can still give you. He nodded toward the square, toward the Honeystone Chapel 2 streets over, toward the whole town already busy rewriting yesterday into a story it could live with. The rest of it just walked out my door and told me the price. Outside, the 8 o'clock bells of the chapel he had spent yesterday repairing began to ring the hour, warm and true and carrying over the rooftops, and Nora stood in the sawdust light in a stranger's flannel shirt and understood. With a cold clarity that no one had arranged for her, that she had climbed out of one trap and, in the climbing, sprung another shut on the only person who had asked her for nothing at all. "There's something you should know about me," Theo said then, quietly into the ringing, and stopped, as if the sentence had cost more than he'd budgeted, and set the empty mug down and did not finish it. Whatever it was, it went back behind the first locked door she'd found in him, and the bells rang on, and Nora did not push, because he had never once pushed her. But she saw the shape of it in his face, a second weight, older than the mortgage, that had nothing to do with Grant Whitfield at all, and she knew, the way she'd known at the top of the ladder, that she could not walk that aisle. That before this was over, she would learn what it was, and that when she did, everything about this quiet man who asked nothing would tilt on its axis. For now there was only the shop, and the September that was suddenly July, and a bride with no shoes of her own, and a debt she hadn't known how to stop herself from making. She reached out, and, because she could not think of one single adequate word, laid her hand flat on the half-finished tabletop the way she'd seen him do it, and found the wood still faintly warm from the lamp, alive under her palm, given every chance. "Then we've got till September," she said, "to give it a fair shot." Theo looked at her hand on his father's table, and something moved behind his eyes that he was, as ever, too courteous to name. Beyond the door, the bells finished the hour and let the last note fade into the hot bright morning, and neither of them said what both of them had begun already, and against every reasonable instinct, to hope. The bells hadn't been quiet 10 minutes before the town started coming to the door. The first knock was a customer who wasn't a customer. A woman Nora half knew from the pharmacy counter, holding an empty picture frame she claimed needed regluing, her eyes going straight past Theo and up the stairs to where Nora stood in borrowed flannel. The second was a boy sent by somebody's mother to see if the rumor had legs. Theo met each of them in the doorway with the frame of his own body, said the shop opened at 9, and shut the door with a courtesy so complete it left no crack to argue with. "You're a curiosity now," he told Nora, coming back to the workbench. "By noon Dell's wife will have you halfway to Mexico with a jewel thief. Is that a joke? Poor one." He turned a plane over in his hands, checked the blade against the light. "I'm out of practice. My material's usually more patient than this." The third knock came at 9 sharp, and it was not curiosity. It was a hat the size of a bird bath. "Well," said Aunt Marion, stepping over the threshold with a canvas tote in each hand and surveying the workshop the way a general surveys a field he intends to win, "at least it smells honest in here." That chapel smelled like a funeral parlor that had gotten above itself. She set the totes on the half-finished table without asking whose it was. "I brought you clothes, Nora, because I will not have my great-niece receiving the entire town in a lumberjack's nightshirt. And I brought sandwiches, because whatever else is happening, people forget to eat, and then they make decisions on an empty stomach, which is how your mother married your father." Marion. Nora came down the stairs fast and put her arms around the old woman. And Marion, who did not hold with fuss, held on a beat longer than she'd admit to later. There, you're all bones and drama." Marion pulled back and held her at arm's length, taking in the smeared liner, the torn veil pin still winking in her hair. She reached up and worked the pin free with 2 steady fingers and dropped it in her pocket like a thing she was confiscating. You look better than you did yesterday. I'll say that. Yesterday you looked like a hostage in a magazine. Everyone thinks I've lost my mind. Everyone thought I'd lost mine when I sold the farm and moved to a flat over the bakery. Do you know what I lost? 2 acres of thistle and a husband who chewed with his mouth open. Marion began unpacking sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, laying them out in a neat row on the wood. You didn't lose your mind, Nora. You found it up a ladder. Peculiar filing system, but there it is. She glanced up at Theo, sharp as the needle she'd been sewing with yesterday. And this is the ladder's owner. Theo Hale. Ma'am. Marion Ashby. I sat front left yesterday until 2:40, at which point the groom informed 400 people there'd been a medical emergency. She let that land. I have not had a medical emergency in the emergency sense since 1998, and I resent being made the excuse for one. Whitfield looked me dead in the eye and called my niece a fainting spell. Her mouth thinned. I have known that boy's family a long time. They are the kind of people who fix a scratch on the car and never notice they've hit someone. Theo said nothing. But he set the plane down. Eat, Marion ordered, pushing a sandwich at each of them. And then, Nora, you and I are going to have a conversation about money, because I heard something at the 8 o'clock service that I did not care for. And it wasn't about you. Nora's stomach dropped. What did you hear? I heard Grant Whitfield tell the Hallorans, very sadly, over coffee, that it was a shame, a real shame, that a fine old family business in the square was about to go under, and how he might, out of the goodness of his heart, be in a position to help. Marion's eyes went to the hand-painted sign over the door. He named the shop, Nora, he named it before, 9 in the morning. That's not a man who's been left. That's a man who's found a lever. The sandwich sat untouched in Nora's hand. Outside, a delivery truck ground past, and the July light came through the front glass thick as syrup, and she understood that the day she'd thought was hers had already been repossessed by someone else and reissued with his name larger at the top. Diane came at 11, and she did not knock. She simply opened the shop door and stood in it, small and immaculate in a linen dress the color of weak tea, her handbag clutched to her middle like a life-preserver, and looked at her daughter across a room that smelled of cedar and cut apples from Marion's sandwiches. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then Diane's chin trembled once, and she mastered it, the way Nora had watched her master 1,000 things. You slept here, Diane said, above a shop, with a man you met yesterday. He slept downstairs, Diane, Marion said from the corner, not looking up from her crossword. Among the wood, like a gnome. Sit down before you fall down. I'm not, Marion. Please. Diane's hand tightened on the bag. Nora, do you have any idea what you have done? Not to yourself, to all of us. The Hallorans moved a board meeting. Your father has done business with Grant's people for 11 years. 11 years, Nora. The equipment loan on the nursery, the line of credit we carried through the bad spring, do you know whose bank that is? And there it was, the second lever, sliding into place beside the first. Nora felt the old machinery start up in her chest, the reflex to soothe, to give a little to keep the room calm, and she pressed her thumbnail into her palm and made herself let it go. Say it plainly, Mom. I am saying it plainly. Diane's voice cracked down the middle. We are not people who can afford to be on Grant Whitfield's bad side. We are the people who smile and are grateful. That is what I was trying to give you, a place on the safe side of that. A life where you are the one being smiled at, not the one doing the smiling. She looked around the workshop, at the worn floor and the racked chisels and the sawdust gone gold in the window light, and her face did something complicated and sad. And instead, you've run to the poorest man in the square, and made him the thing Grant wants to break, and made yourself the reason. Diane. Theo's voice was quiet and even. He'd come to stand near the stairs, hands loose at his sides. With respect. She didn't make me anything. I held a ladder because a person needed one. That's the whole account. You don't know him, Diane said, turning on Theo with a mother's fear sharpened into something almost cruel. You have no idea what he can do to a man in this town. You'll be closed by autumn, and she'll blame herself for the rest of her life. And where will you be? You'll be gone, and she'll be here, ruined, with everyone knowing. Her breath hitched. At least Grant would keep her comfortable. Comfortable, Nora repeated. The word tasted like the hairspray and the scorched sweetness of the curling iron, like a program with her name in a smaller font. Mom, look at me. Yesterday, at the top of that window, I was more afraid of comfortable than I was of the drop. Do you understand what I'm telling you? I would rather have fallen. Diane flinched as if struck. And in the flinch Nora saw, for one unguarded second, the same thing she'd seen in the bridal room, a woman who had done sums by lamplight, who had wanted her daughter safe from those sums so badly she'd sewn her into a life instead. It was love. It was the worst kind of love, the kind that measured itself in comfort because it had never been able to afford anything grander. I'm not going back to him, Nora said, gentler now. Whatever it costs. I need you to hear it once. Diane's mouth opened, closed. She looked at the sandwiches, at Marion, at the honest, ugly couch visible at the top of the stairs, and something in her seemed to fold down and go quiet. Then God help all of us, she said, because I don't think you understand yet what he's willing to spend to be right. She turned to go, and at the door she stopped, and without looking back she said, low, your father wanted me to tell you he's not angry. He couldn't come himself. He's at the bank. And she was gone, the little bell over the door shivering behind her, and the shop held its breath. Well, Marion said into the silence, folding her crossword, she's improving. Last time she was afraid, she reorganized my entire pantry alphabetically. This time, she only threatened the apocalypse. They worked, because there was nothing else to do with the fear, and because Theo seemed to understand that Nora's hands needed a task the way a runaway needs a road. He set her to sanding, a curved chair rail clamped in the vise, a folded square of paper, and the simple mercy of a repetitive thing. With the grain, he said, standing behind her the first time to guide her wrist. His hand closing over hers, warm and nicked and certain, exactly as it had been on the ladder. Not against. The wood tells you which way. Feel that? Smooth one way, catch the other. He moved her hand through the stroke. There, let it teach you. For a moment, neither of them moved. She could feel the heat of him along her back, the sawdust smell of him. The steadiness that had talked her down 30 feet of stone. Her breath went shallow. Then he stepped back, easy, and put a respectful yard of workshop between them, and picked up his own work as if nothing at all had passed through the air, and Nora stood with her heart going and sanded a chair rail and did not trust herself to speak. You're good at this, she said finally. I'm patient at it. Different thing. He fit a dovetail joint together, took it apart, shaved a hair, fit it again. My father used to say, patience is just love with its sleeves rolled up. He had a lot of sayings. He put half of them on the wall. He nodded at a beam over the bench, where words had been burned into the wood in a careful hand, measure twice. And beneath it, smaller, stay. Stay? Something crossed his face, the first locked door again, the second wait. He didn't answer at once. He turned a chisel in his fingers. Then, because she had climbed out a window in front of him, and he seemed to have decided that bought her something, he said, "He wrote that the year I left. You left." I left. He set the chisel down, precise, the way he set down everything that cost him. 26 years old and full of myself. I'd got taken on with a restoration firm in the city. Cathedrals, old libraries, work you could put your name to where people would see it. My father built church pews and kitchen tables. He stopped, chose the honest word. I wanted to matter somewhere bigger than Marbury. So I went. And he burned stay into that beam and never once asked me to. Just left it there where he'd see it every morning. He picked up the dovetail again. I got 4 good years in the city. Won a prize even, my name on a plaque under a rose window 300 years old. His jaw worked. And while I was polishing other men's cathedrals, the man who taught me to hold a chisel was here, in this shop, starting to forget which end of it to hold. Nora went very still. The sandpaper stopped. Theo, his mind, Theo said, and the veiled word cost him visibly, laid down careful as the oak into the frame. It started to slip, slowly at first. A wrong order, a bill paid twice. A morning he opened the shop and couldn't remember the combination to his own safe and stood in the square in his slippers till a neighbor walked him home. He breathed out. Nobody told me. He made them promise not to. He didn't want to be the thing that called me back from my rose windows. So he took a mortgage against the building to cover the seasons he couldn't work, and he kept the sign lit. And he waited, and he wrote, "Stay on the beam." He looked at her. I came home 4 years ago because a neighbor finally broke the promise and called me. And I have been trying to be a Hale and a son ever since, because he can only manage the one now. That's what I couldn't finish telling you this morning. That's the shop you climbed down into. He took her to see his father the next afternoon, and Nora understood it was not a small thing, that in 4 years he had likely taken no one. By the way, he didn't speak the whole drive out to the low brick house at the edge of town with the good garden and the wide sunny room where a dozen older people sat with the windows open to the July warmth. Walter Hale was in a chair by the window with a lap full of small wooden blocks and a face weathered like a fence post, and when Theo came in, he looked up with an expression Nora would spend a long time trying to describe to herself afterward. Not quite recognition, but a kind of gladness that arrived before the name did. The body remembering what the mind had misplaced. "There's my good hands," Walter said. "Come to fix the drawer?" "Come to see you, Pop." Theo pulled a chair close and sat, easy, unhurried, the same steadiness he'd braced the ladder with. "How's the light today?" "The light's fine. It's the drawer." "Sticks in the wet weather." Walter's eyes drifted to Nora and cleared and grew courteous. "Now who's this? You've brought a girl. Barbara, did you see? He's brought a girl." "This is Nora, Pop, Nora. Walter said it the way you test a joint for square. That's a good solid name. None of your fashions in it." He held out a hand, and Nora took it, and it was Theo's hand in 40 years, the same nicks, the same certainty, gone a little soft. "You'll want to watch this one, Nora. He measures everything twice, and himself not at all. Always did. Ran off to the city, you know. No reproach in it, just weather." I told him. I said, "Son, the work that lasts is the work nobody photographs. He'll learn." He patted her hand and let it go and returned to his blocks, fitting 2 together, taking them apart, fitting them again, and Nora watched Theo watch his father do the exact thing she'd watched Theo do at the bench, and had to turn her face to the window for a moment. They sat an hour. Walter told the same story about a rocking chair twice, and both times Theo laughed at the end as if it were new, and it was, Nora saw, for the man telling it, it was always new, and Theo had decided to meet him there rather than drag him forward into the sadder truth. When they rose to go, Walter caught Theo's sleeve. "You'll keep the sign lit," he said, and for one moment his eyes were entirely clear, entirely present, a man surfacing. "Hale and Son, your grandfather's letters. You'll keep it." "I'll keep it, Pop. Good boy." The clarity sank again, gentle as a stone into water. "Fix the drawer on your way out." In the parking lot, Nora stood in the hot, bright afternoon and did not trust her voice. Theo leaned against the truck, looking at nothing. "That's why the September payment isn't just a payment," she said finally. "It's the sign," Theo said. "It's the one thing I promised him that's still all the way true. He forgets my face some days. He has never once forgotten that shop." He rubbed his jaw. So when Whitfield stood in my doorway and priced it, he wasn't threatening a building. I just couldn't say all that at 7 a.m. to a woman who'd climbed out a window. Nora looked at him, this quiet man who had given up rose windows to laugh twice at the same story, and felt the trap she'd sprung shut settle its full weight onto her shoulders, and knew, with the same cold clarity she'd had at the top of the ladder, exactly what Grant would offer, and exactly how much it would cost her to refuse it. The offer came on Thursday, and it did not come from Grant. That was the genius of it. It came in a cream envelope, hand-delivered to the shop by Nora's father, who stood in the doorway in his good jacket, looking like a man delivering a summons he'd been forced to sign. "I told him no," Ray said, before Nora even had the envelope open. His voice was rough, for the record. When he laid it out, I told him no, he could keep his generosity. And then he reminded me about the nursery loan, and the 11 years, and your mother, and he stopped. He was a big, soft-handed man who had spent his life being reasonable, and Nora watched reasonableness cost him something at last. I'm ashamed to be the one carrying it. But he knew you'd open it if it came from me. He knows all the doors. Nora opened it. It was one page, Grant's own hand, warm and unhurried as his voice. "Nora, no lawyers, no drama, no more theater in front of the town. Here is the whole of it. Come home." A quiet ceremony in the fall. No fuss. We tell them the postponement did its work. In exchange, the Whitfield Group renews the Hale note on a 30-year term at a rate the old man never dreamed of, forgives the balloon entirely, and funds the restoration of the building besides. Your carpenter keeps his sign lit for the rest of his natural life. Refuse, and the note comes due in July, as is my right, and I am afraid I will exercise it. I am not a cruel man. I am simply a man who does not lose. You have until Sunday. G. The page shook in her hands. She read it twice. Then she set it face down on the half-finished table, very carefully, the way Theo set down things that cost him, and she stood in the sawdust light and understood that Grant Whitfield had found the one price she could not easily refuse to pay, because it was not her comfort he was buying any more. It was Walter Hale's sign. It was the beam that said stay. "What is it?" Theo said from the bench. He'd stopped working. He was watching her face. "Nothing." The lie came out smooth, a year of practice behind it. "Family thing. My mother." She folded the page small and put it in the pocket of Marion's borrowed cardigan and gave him a bright, terrible smile. She hated the instant it crossed her face. The bridal room smile, the I'm thrilled smile, the mask she'd climbed out a window to be rid of. Nothing you need to hold up. Theo looked at her a long moment. He was not a man who missed the grain of a thing. But he had also spent a whole afternoon teaching her that he would not force a joint that wasn't ready, and so he only nodded, slow, and turned back to his dovetails, and let her carry the weight she'd decided to carry alone. Which was, Nora would think later, the first real lie she had told since she stopped being a bride, and the beginning of the end of the trust she'd been given for free. Ray lingered at the door. Nora, whatever's in that letter, don't you make his mistake. He nodded at Theo's back. Don't you decide to be somebody's cathedral by giving up your own two hands. Go home, Dad, she said softly. Tell Mom I love her. Tell her I'm all right. He went. And Sunday sat at the end of the week like a cliff. She didn't sleep Friday or Saturday. She lay on the honest couch and listened to the small sounds of the building, the tick of it cooling, the far-off freight whistle, once near midnight. Theo moving quietly downstairs to check a clamp he'd worried about, and she did the sums she'd sworn off doing. On one side, her own life, barely a week old, unshod and improvised, and hers. On the other, a sign, a beam, an old man who had never forgotten one shop, and the quiet, steadiest man she'd ever met, closed by autumn and driven out of the only place he'd let himself belong, because a bride had climbed down his ladder. She turned the letter over in the dark. She thought about the smaller font and how she'd sworn never to be printed small again. Then she thought about Walter Hale's clear eyes for one surfacing moment. You'll keep it. And she understood that Grant had built her a trap with no dishonorable exit, because the selfish choice and the loving choice had been welded into opposite ends of the same board. By Saturday's gray dawn she had decided, the way she'd decided at the top of the ladder, with her body before her mind caught up. She would say yes to Grant, and she would do it before she could be talked out of it, and she would never let Theo know it had been a trade, because if he knew, he would refuse to be saved, and lose the sign anyway out of stubbornness and honor. She would give herself back to the smaller font, and she would call it a gift, and she would let him think she'd simply been a runaway who ran twice. She wrote Theo a note on a page torn from his own order pad and left it under the cold kettle, and it said only, "Some drawers stick in wet weather. Keep the sign lit. N." She thought he might not understand it for days. She hoped he wouldn't understand it until it was done. She put on Marion's cardigan and the 2 sizes too big flip-flops, and she walked out into the Sunday morning square before the bells, past the closed-up ice cream stand, toward the big white Whitfield house on the hill, where she knew Grant took his coffee on the veranda at 8, unhurried, a man who did not lose. She had gotten as far as the fountain in the square when she heard the truck. It came around the corner too fast for a man who was never in a hurry, and stopped at the curb with a small skid of gravel, and Theo was out of it before it had fully rocked to rest, the torn note crushed in one fist, his face open in a way she had never seen it. Not steady now, not patient. Stripped right down to the fear underneath. What is this? He held up the note. His voice wasn't level. For the first time since the ladder, it wasn't level. Keep the sign lit. You want to tell me what that means, or do I have to guess? Because I've been standing in my shop for 10 minutes guessing, and I do not like where it lands. Theo, where are you going, Nora? He came toward her across the wet cobbles, and behind him the sun was coming up hard and white over the square, catching the fountain, catching the honeystone of the chapel 2 streets over that he'd fixed with his own hands. It's Sunday. You're wearing your aunt's sweater and shoes from a bait store, and you're walking up the hill. And you wrote me a note about a drawer, and my whole, his breath, caught. Tell me you're not doing what I think you're doing. Tell me you didn't get a letter from that man on Thursday and lie to my face about your mother. And there it was, the trust, cracking clean down the middle, right there in the square where anyone could see, not because she'd stayed, but because she'd tried to leave in the one way that would save him. Nora stood with the sun on her face and the letter in her pocket and the whole terrible arithmetic of it in her throat, and she opened her mouth to lie one final, loving, unforgivable time, and found, looking at his stripped, bare face, that she had climbed out of a window precisely so she would never have to wear that smile again, and that she could not, would not, put it on now. Not for him. Not even to save him. He'll forgive the note, she said. All of it. 30 years, the restoration, the sign lit for the rest of Walter's life. I have until 8 o'clock. Her voice was very steady, steadier than his. All I have to do is go back to the smaller font, Theo. That's the whole price. And you don't get a vote, because if I gave you one, you'd choose the sign, you'd choose to lose it. And I am not going to stand in another window and watch a good thing break, because everyone was too busy being honorable to climb down. Across the square, up on the white veranda, a figure in shirt-sleeves set down a coffee cup and stood, and lifted one unhurried hand, as if he had all the time in the world and knew exactly which way the wood would go. Theo saw the raised hand too. He did not look at it long. He looked at Nora instead, the borrowed cardigan, the ridiculous blue flip-flops gone dark with dew, the letter making its small square weight in her pocket, and something in his stripped open face settled back down. Not into the old patience, into something harder and warmer at once, a decision setting the way a joint sets when it finally goes home. No, he said. Theo, you don't understand what he can. I understand every word of it. I've been reading that man across a mortgage for 4 years. He stepped close, and the fountain threw its cold thread of sound behind them, and the wet cobbles shone pale gold where the sun found them. You climbed out of a window so you'd never have to wear that smile again. And you were about to walk up that hill and put it right back on. For me. For a sign nailed over a door. For your father. I know whose it is. His voice caught on the word, and he let it catch. You don't get to spend yourself to keep a light on for me, Nora. That's not a rescue. That's the same trap, only you carried it up the hill yourself and called it a gift. He took the crushed note from his fist and, very deliberately, smoothed it flat against his own chest, folded it once, and pushed it into his shirt pocket, out of her reach. You want to talk about honor and being too stubborn to be saved. Look in a mirror. A woman with a hymn book slowed on the far side of the fountain, then another, drawn the way people are always drawn to 2 figures standing too still in a public square. Somewhere behind the chapel roofs the first warm-up chord of the organ leaked into the morning. It was nearly service. The whole town was coming to the square, and the square had become a stage, and Nora felt the old cold reflex rise in her, smooth it over, make it small, keep the room calm. She pressed her thumbnail into her palm. Then she made herself stop. He'll do it, she said. He'll call the note. Walter loses the shop. The sign goes dark. You'll have given up rose windows for nothing, and it'll be because a bride came down your ladder. Then it'll be dark, and I'll have lost the shop, and I will still, every single morning of the rest of my life, be glad I planted that ladder in the grass. Theo took her hand, not the careful borrowed way he'd let it go at the bottom of the wall, but fully, both of his around it, nicked and warm and certain. I asked you nothing that first afternoon because you'd spent a year being asked to be everything for everybody. So hear me ask you one thing now, the only thing I'll ever ask you. Don't marry a man to buy me a roof. Whatever happens to that building, I would rather stand in the ashes of it with you than keep it lit and watch you go small again, where I have to smile at you across the aisle for the rest of my days." The bells began. They came in over the rooftops warm and true, the 8 o'clock bells of the chapel he'd fixed with his own 2 hands. And under them Nora heard the thing he had not quite said, and had said anyway, the way he said everything that cost him, sideways, in the grain of it. She turned her hand over inside his and held on. "That's the closest you've come to a declaration," she said, and her voice shook and then steadied, steadier than his, for a man who measures twice. "I'm out of practice. A rough breath. My material's usually more patient." And there it was, the joke from the shop, come round again, and she laughed, wet and astonished, right there in front of the gathering square, and she understood, in the laughing, that she had stopped, somewhere on the walk up toward the fountain, being a runaway. A runaway keeps running. She was done running. She was, for the first time in a year, exactly where she meant to be. Up on the hill, the shirt-sleeved figure came down off the veranda steps and started across the square, unhurried, a coffee cup left steaming on the rail behind him. Grant Whitfield walked the way he did everything, as though the ground were expected to be flat for him, and generally was. By the time he reached the fountain, a loose ring of townsfolk had thickened along the near side. Hymn books lowered, and Nora saw him clock them the way he'd clocked the shop, pricing the audience, deciding which face he was going to wear. He chose warm. He chose sorrowful. It arrived on him seamless. "Sweetheart," he stopped a courteous few feet off, hands loose, a man with nothing to hide. "It's not even 8:30. You didn't have to walk. I'd have sent the car." His eyes moved once to Nora's hand inside Theo's, registered it, moved on as if it were a chair badly placed. "Mister, hail. You're up early for a man with a difficult autumn ahead." "Difficult mornings, mostly," Theo said. "They pass." Grant smiled at that, indulgent. "I'm going to talk to Nora now." "Privately would be kinder, but you've made that hard." He turned the smile on her and dropped his voice into the register he kept for closing, low, warm, a hand at the back of the neck. "You have my letter. You have until 8. It's a good offer, Nora. It's a generous offer. 30 years, forgiven balloon, the restoration, the old man's sign lit till the end of his days. I could have simply let the note come due and said nothing. I didn't. That should tell you something about the kind of man you're leaving." "It does," Nora said. "It tells me exactly the kind of man." Something flickered under the warmth. He recovered it. "You're upset. That's fair. Come home." "Well, I'm not upset, Grant." And she found, saying it, that it was true. The pulse was gone out of her teeth. Her hands were her own. "I read your letter 3 times. I want to make sure the whole square hears me answer it, because you told 400 people on Saturday there'd been a medical emergency, and there wasn't. And I've decided I'm finished letting you print my life in a smaller font than yours." A murmur ran the ring of listeners. Grant heard it. His jaw did the small thing it did. Nora, quiet now, all the warmth pulled in tight, just for her. "Think very carefully. This isn't about you and me anymore. You can throw your own life on the fire if you like. That's your right. But there's an old man in a chair by a window whose whole world is 4 letters over a door, and the paper on that door sits in my firm's cabinet. I don't want to move it. Don't make me a villain in front of your neighbors for a decision you're forcing." "There it is," Marion said. She came through the ring like a ship through gulls, birdbath hat and canvas tote and all. Ray a half step behind her in his good jacket, with his face gone from gray to something firmer. Marian planted herself square between Grant and her great-niece and looked up at him from under the hat brim with 71 years of not being impressed. "You just did the thing, Grant. Right out loud, by the fountain, on the Lord's morning, in front of the Hallorans." She nodded, and heads turned, and yes, there at the edge of the crowd stood the couple who'd moved a board meeting, in their church clothes, listening. "You threatened to put a sick old craftsman out of the shop his father built, unless a woman marries you. You called it generous. You put it in writing." She let that sink into the square like water into dry board. "I've known your people 30 years. Your grandfather would have taken the strap to you for less." "Mrs. Ashby, I'm not finished." Marian said it flat, and Grant, astonishingly, shut his mouth. "You built this whole thing on a lever, and the lever is a September payment you swore you could yank into July." Well, she swung the canvas toed up and set it on the lip of the fountain with a heavy, deliberate clunk, and reached in and drew out a cardboard folder soft at the corners. "I sold 2 acres of thistle and a farmhouse 4 years ago, and I have been sitting on the proceeds waiting for one single thing in this town worth spending it on. I called Ray's bank Friday. I called yours Saturday, and made a very great nuisance of myself to a young man in a call center who will remember me. As of 9 o'clock this morning, when they open, the hail note is paid. In full. The balloon, the term, the whole of it. Cash. The square went very quiet under the bells." "You can't," Grant said. "I'm 71, dear. I can do almost anything I please. That's the one mercy of it." Marian slid the folder into Theo's free hand and closed his fingers over it, brisk, the way she'd worked the veil pin loose 2 days before. "It's a loan, young man, at a rate you'll grumble about but survive, and I want it back with your father's dovetails on my kitchen when I'm 90. "But it is not. From 9 o'clock his. She jerked her chin at Grant. "You've nothing left to yank, Grant. Your lever's a lit match with no rope on the end of it." Grant looked at the folder in Theo's hand. Nora watched it happen, watched the whole machinery of him hunt for the next hold, the next technicality, the next warm word that had always, his entire golden life, found somewhere to catch, and find nothing. She had seen that face exactly once before, on the workshop stair, the moment she'd said no, genuine, unguarded surprise, the face of a man who had made a career of never once having to hear it. "You're all making a mistake," he said, and the warmth was gone now, worn through, and what came out from under it was the cold she'd caught glimpses of for a year and talked herself out of every time. "You think this is a wedding I'm losing." "I don't lose weddings. I lose nothing." Ray, look at me. The nursery line of credit renews in October. 11 years. You want to gamble your business on your aunt's thistle money and your daughter's tantrum? And Ray Cole, who had spent his whole soft-handed life being reasonable, stepped forward past his aunt and stood in front of the man who held the paper on his livelihood, and Nora saw her father find, at 59, in the middle of the square, the thing she'd found at the top of a ladder. "Call it then," Ray said. His voice was rough, and it did not stop. "The line of credit. Call it in October, Grant. I'll dig thistle with Marian before I'll trade my girl to keep a rate. I stood in that chapel Saturday and let you tell 400 people my daughter had fainted. I delivered your letter to her door because you knew she'd open it from my hand. I have been ashamed since Thursday, and I'm done being ashamed, and I would rather lose the nursery my father started than be the man who sold his own child to save it." He was shaking. He did not stop. "You've done business in this town on your name for 11 years. Go home and look at what your name is worth in the square this morning. That's what you've spent." The Hallorans were already turning to each other, heads bent, the particular low murmur of people recalculating a man in real time. Along the ring of the crowd it moved outward, face to face, the woman from the pharmacy, the boy who'd been sent to check the rumor, Dell from the bait store, still in his apron. Grant Whitfield had built everything he had on a small town's goodwill and a family firm's good name, and Nora watched him understand, a beat too late, that he had just spent both of them at a fountain, out loud, to force a marriage, and that there was no warm word left in the world that could shave that smooth and slide it back like it fit. For one moment he looked, almost, like a man. Almost like someone you could pity, a person who had been handed so much so early that no one had ever taught him the ground could stop being flat. His mouth opened. Nothing generous came. "You'll regret this," he said to Nora, and it came out thin, without the old music, a threat that had lost its firm. "No," she said gently, because she found she meant the gentleness. "I don't think I will. I think I'll regret almost nothing from now on. That's the whole reason I climbed out the window." Grant Whitfield stood a moment longer in the ring of his neighbors and their lowered hymn books, in the warm July light on the wet stones, and then he did the only thing left to a man who does not lose. He turned, without another word, and walked back the way he'd come, up the hill, unhurried to the last, as if the leaving were also his idea. The steaming cup still sat on the veranda rail. He did not hurry to it. But the ground was not flat for him any more, and everyone in the square could see him feel it in his knees, and no one followed, and the bells rang him all the way up. For a while nobody said anything. Then Marian picked her tote back up off the fountain, peered into it, and produced, of all things, a wax paper packet. "I brought sandwiches," she announced to the square at large. "There's been a great deal of emotion, and it is nearly 9, and I will not have anybody making a decision on an empty stomach. That is how my niece married Ray, and look how that turned out, needing 30 years to grow a spine, but he grew it." She pressed a sandwich into Ray's shaking hands. "Eat, you great sad tree. You did well. Don't ruin it by weeping in front of the Hallorans." And Ray laughed, a wet, cracked, astonished laugh, the exact shape of his daughter's, and the ring of townsfolk began to loosen and drift toward the chapel and its bells, and here and there a hand landed on Theo's shoulder as they passed. A low word, a nod at the folder in his fist. Steady hands. Everyone had always known whose hands were steady in this town. It had only taken a fountain to remind them out loud. Nora turned to Theo. He was looking at the soft, cornered folder as if it might dissolve. His jaw was working in the way she'd learned meant he'd run out of veiled words and hadn't found any plain ones yet. "Marian," he managed, "I can't take. You can and you will, and you'll make me dovetails, and if you argue I'll rescind the whole thing and marry you off to Grant myself out of spite." Marian tugged her hat straight. "Now, I am going to go sit in the front left pew I paid for with my dignity on Saturday, and I am going to enjoy a service for once. You two." She looked from one of them to the other, and for a woman who did not hold with fuss, her eyes were suspiciously bright. "You go find out what you are. You've earned an hour to do it in." And she went, tote-swinging, into the chapel. Then it was only the two of them and the fountain and Ray a little apart, giving them the room, chewing a sandwich he clearly could not taste, watching the sky. Theo opened the folder. Inside was Marian's neat spidered hand on a single sheet, and beneath it a photocopy of the note stamped in red where a young man in a call center had in fact remembered her. He read it twice. Nora watched him read it the way she'd first watched him fit oak to a swollen frame, testing it, not trusting the fit until he'd felt it hold. "It goes," she said softly. "It fits, Theo. Let it." He closed the folder. He looked up, and the fear was all the way gone out of him now, and what was left underneath was the thing he had never once been discourteous enough to name. "There's a thing I keep not finishing telling you," he said. "In the shop. On the beam. Under measure twice," he burned one more word. "You saw it. Stay. He wrote it the year I left. I always thought it was for me. Come home, don't go, stay." Theo turned the folder in his hands once, the way his father turned blocks by the window. "I stood in the shop last night after you'd gone quiet upstairs, and I looked at it. And I thought, maybe he didn't only mean it as a rope round my ankle. Maybe he meant it the way you'd say it to yourself. Stay. Be a man who stays. Who plants the ladder and holds it as long as she needs and doesn't run when the note comes due." He breathed. "I've been so afraid of being the one who left that I forgot there's a kind of staying that isn't a trap. You showed me that. You climbed down out of the exact thing I was scared I'd become, and you didn't ask me for one single thing, and I have been undone about it since Friday." The organ swelled behind the chapel wall, and this time it did not sound like a beginning that belonged to someone else. It sounded like a warm thing filling a warm room. "I don't have much," he said. "2 rooms and a shop I owe your aunt for now. Basil that shouldn't have survived July. A father who'll ask you to fix a drawer every time you visit and won't remember you left. It's not the safe side of anybody's fountain, Nora. It's the opposite of a smaller font. It's sawdust in the hem of everything you own for the rest of your life." "Sawdust and sea air," Nora said, and her throat closed. "That's the girl I traded away one calm room at a time. A life that smelled like sawdust and sea air. I didn't even know I'd said it out loud in the garden, and you—" She stopped. "You built it and set it in front of me before you knew my name. I held a ladder. You held a ladder." She stepped into the sawdust and sun-warm cotton and cedar smell of him, and put her hand flat on his chest over the folded, worthless letter and the beating certainty underneath it. "Hold this." He kissed her by the fountain, in the wet gold light, with the bells going and her aunt's front left pew empty for one more scandalous minute, and Ray politely studying the elms. And it was not a photographer's kiss, not posed, not for the front of anyone's card. It was the kiss of 2 people who had each, separately and against every reasonable instinct, given a thing a fair shot instead of forcing it to be finished by 2 o'clock. When they came apart she was laughing, and he was not quite, and the not quite was, she understood. Simply the size of what he felt arriving faster than his careful face could carry it. 100 years, she said. "I don't know that it'll last that long." He pressed his forehead to hers. "But I gave it every chance. That's most of it, usually." The note cleared at 9, when the bank opened, exactly as Marion had promised, and to the visible sorrow of no one. By Monday the 8 o'clock service had a new story to tell itself, and it was a better one than Grant's. The runaway bride and the carpenter and the aunt with the thistle money, the fountain, Ray Cole finding his voice at 59. Small towns forgive almost anything except a man who prices what they love out loud, and Marbury did not forgive Grant Whitfield. The Hallorans took their business quietly to a firm 2 counties over. The board that had moved a meeting for a wedding met about other things. By September, when the payment that had once meant everything would have come due, the Whitfield Group had sold its interest in half the square to a cooperative of the shops themselves, arranged, in part, by a bank manager who had been leaned on by a 71-year-old woman in a birdbath hat and found he rather enjoyed it. Grant kept the house on the hill. He was seen less and less in the square below it. A man who does not lose has nowhere to put losing, and so he simply went where the losing couldn't be watched, and the town let him, because the town had a lit sign to look at instead. The sign stayed lit. Nora learned the shop the way she'd learned the ladder, with her body first, her hands catching the grain before her mind named it. Theo set her to sanding, then to joints, then, by the cool end of that long summer, to a small stool she made entirely herself, wobbly at first and then not, 4 legs that finally sat square on the plank floor without a shim. She burned her own word into the underside where a buyer would never look, the way Walter had taught his son to sign the work that lasts in the place nobody photographs. She did not tell Theo what the word was for a long time. When she finally turned the stool over for him, it said, in a careful, unpracticed hand, "Stayed." They took Walter a cushion for his chair, and a new drawer for the little chest by his window, one that would not stick in the wet weather, and Walter ran his soft-nicked thumb along the dovetails and said, "Now that's honest work, that is." "Who did this?" And Theo said, "We did, Pop," and Walter looked at Nora with the gladness that always arrived before the name, and said, "You want to watch this one? She measures twice." And Nora said she would, and meant it, and turned to the window so the old man wouldn't see her face do what it did. Some days he knew her. Most days he knew the wood. Every day, without fail, when they rose to go, he caught his son's sleeve and said, "You'll keep the sign lit." And every day Theo said, "I'll keep it, Pop." And it was, of everything either of them owned, the one thing that stayed entirely true. They married in the autumn, when the elms had gone to copper, and the peonies were long finished, and could not cost more than anyone's first house. It was small. Marion sat front left and cried into a handkerchief she would deny using. Diane, who had spent a whole summer learning that the safe side of the fountain was the loneliest ground in the county, walked her daughter not down an aisle but across the workshop floor, through sawdust turned gold in the late slant of light, and did not organize a single thing, and was, everyone agreed, the better for it. Ray gave her away and got the words wrong, and nobody cared. There was no program with anybody's name in a smaller font. There was no font at all. Only 2 people saying plain true things in a room that smelled of cedar and linseed oil, under a beam that said measure twice, and beneath it, smaller, stay. The window they'd first met beneath, 30 feet up the chapel's honeystone, Theo had gone back and finished. The swelled frame eased. The new oak fit true, good for the next 100 years. On the morning of their wedding, Nora made him drive her out to see it. She stood in the long grass, where a ladder had once leaned exactly where a person would need it. And she looked up at the closed and perfect window, and then she did the thing she'd promised herself in the dark on an honest couch she had not been able to look at directly. She climbed, not down. This time. Up, he held the ladder. Of course he held the ladder, planted it, tested it with his shoulder, said the rungs were dry. And she went up in her plain autumn dress to the sill she'd once hooked a barefoot over in ivory silk, and she sat in the open window with the whole gold and copper valley laid out below her and her carpenter in the grass, looking up. And for the first time in her life she was up high and not the least bit afraid, because she knew exactly which way the wood would go, and she knew who was holding the bottom. "Come down when you're ready," Theo called up, grinning now, all the patience worn into something easier. "Not before. I've got it as long as you need." "I'm not running this time," she called back. "I'm just looking." "I know." He shaded his eyes against the morning. "That's the difference. Take your time. There's a rung right where you think there is. Real love, she had learned that summer, does not always arrive on the safe side of the fountain, where the sums are already done and the ground is promised flat. Sometimes it comes to you in a garden that smells of cut oak, from a stranger who asks you nothing at all and steadies a ladder and lets your own 2 feet do the knowing. And then, when the whole world tells you the fit is impossible and the note is due and the honorable thing is to break yourself smooth to fit somebody else's frame, it simply stands in the long grass and says, "Don't force it. Give it every chance. I've got it as long as you need." She came down when she was ready, not before. His hand was open beside her elbow, an offered thing she could take or not. She took it. If a held ladder and a lit sign and an aunt with thistle money warmed something in you this evening, stay a while longer with me. Subscribe to Adrian Romance Stories, settle in, and let the next tale find you. I'll keep a light on, and the rungs are always dry.